Welcome everyone to this fantastic ceremony presentation of the articulation with Mär Martinez and Yiscah Smith. We are sitting here in the presence of great giants of thought, of creativity, of bringing spirituality into a place of real sensitivity. Yiscah Smith is a spiritual activist, educator, mentor, and meditation guide who addresses the spiritual practice of encountering the divine spark within. In fact, Yiscah views Judaism as a spiritual practice. She relies on Jewish spiritual teachings to inform and uplift her students and audiences, acting as a compass, gently guiding them to their unique inner selves. Mär Martinez is an interdisciplinary artist specializing in sculptural paintings. Her work dissects dominance, aggression, and power dynamics through the lens of a culturally enforced binary system. We have all of these ideas interlaced in this presentation, and we're so fortunate to have both of them. Without further ado, Yiscah, can you please frame the portion in the talk today? You're on mute here. Sorry.
Okay, I would be honored to. First, welcome. Barachot habaot, barachim habaim, shalom, from my home in Yerushalayim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah. So from Zion will come out the Torah, Davar Hashem Yerushalayim. Parshat Vayakhel. This is an incredible parsha because this is one of the few times that we see Moshe Rabbeinu not only as our teacher, but also as our shepherd. He does something that he's not told that he has to do. Not that he did something contrary to God's will, but it wasn't because God commanded him. And he gathered us together. He, on his own initiative, he gathered us together. But why? Why didn't he just wait to see if God would have commanded him? Because the theme of at least the beginning part of the parsha is about unity. It's about restoring unity and restoring self-confidence. You see, Chevra, this occurred according to our sources, especially in Seder Olam. This occurs the day after Yom Kippur, the first Yom Kippur, which was 120 days after we received the Torah. There was a 40-day period, a 40-day period, and a third 40-day period. And then Moshe came down with the second set of tablets inscribed. On Rosh Chodesh Elul, he went up. This time he brought the tablets, the luchot, and then he came down 40 days later on Yom Kippur, where there was reconciliation, divine forgiveness. And we would expect everyone to be, wow, that's wonderful. God has forgiven us from the Egel Zahav, from that sin of disconnect, of spiritual adultery, of sensing disparity and disunity among us. Why weren't we celebrating? Why weren't we filled with joy to such a point that Moshe felt he had to gather us together as one congregation, as one kehillah? We hadn't forgiven ourselves. I ask you, have you ever done something where you've caused harm to someone unintentionally, not as if for malicious reasons? You've hurt somebody, and then you realize that you've hurt them, and you ask for forgiveness. And sometimes after they forgive each one of us, we may walk away saying, oh my gosh, I've been forgiven. Why don't I feel good? Has that ever happened? We're living in a very harsh world right now. There was the harshness then. And the reason he gathered us together, according to the Ishbitzer Rebbe, in his Sefer Hamei Shiloach, he lived in Poland from 1801 to 1854. The reason he gathered us together was as our shepherd In the Zohar, it refers to Moshe not as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, meaning the teacher of Torah, but Re'ah Mehemna. He's our faithful shepherd. Remember when Moshe first had his first encounter with the divine? He was shepherding his father-in-law's flock. He's still shepherding, only now it's God's flock. It's us. And he felt connected to us. So he gathered us together, according to the Meshiloach, to restore unity, to build our self-confidence. And how? He suggested, we already knew in a sense, but he wanted us to understand Shabbat and the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle, the portable mini temple that accompanied us through the wilderness. Every time we camped, we assembled it. When it was time to leave, we disassembled it. And Moshe suggests in the beginning that the building of the Mishkan during the week and holding back, hesitating, restraining from building the Mishkan on Shabbat, both of these serve as gelling agents to bring us back together. And I want to suggest that what I see in that is that when we feel within ourselves either disparity or between mind, body, heart, and soul, we don't feel connected, we don't feel unified, and then bring it out into the community, into the world at large, there's nothing that can help us really create a sense of achdut than working together on a project. Working together on a project. And Moshe understood that. So he said, you know what? 6 days, we're going to build this Mishkan. And on the 7th day, we're going to celebrate the work we've done during the 6 days as we make room for the divine presence to illuminate herself to us. And it actually worked. It actually worked. So that's what I would like to suggest as the theme, at least in the very beginning, what I shared with my Torah, based on a teaching from one of my teachers here in Nachlaot, Reb Shalom Brat, Zichrono Livracha. All right, so there you have it.
Thank you, thank you. I think that really brings us into a beautiful thought of how do we create. And now, Mär, show us what you've created, what you spent these days bringing out in Sabbath holiness.
Okay, so in response to the teachings that and the talks that I had with Yiscah, I decided to create almost like this vessel and dwelling space. And I saw a clear parallels from ideas of community coming together to create the Mishkan and the concept of a tzedek box, which is a ritual object used where you put acts of righteousness and good deeds that you're trying to manifest to come together and care for your community space. And one of the common themes in the teaching that Yiscah presented was this idea of reunification and coming together and acting from a place of love and kindness and forgivingness when trying to restructure a society that had maybe been in disarray. So there's something that was happening back then and it's something that's still happening now. So it's something that we need to implement, I think, continually throughout our lives because it takes constant work. So I created this ritual object in response to the Torah portion, and I wanted to use contemporary laser cutting techniques as a way to kind of unify these ideas of historic and archaic references and then bringing it into a modern age. So I also put gold leaf and other like more old world materials, and the gold also like it makes it precious. So, and one of the reasons why I used laser cutting, it was to use a polyacrylic plastic that could amplify light, and it becomes this vessel that has an implied shape, but energy is allowed to move in and out of it kind of continuously. We talked a lot about ideas of unification, how individualism, there's like plurality and oneness and plurality. So there are these individual rings. So when you look at them, separately they're just pieces, but they come together and create something that's where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So the concentric circles, I feel like they reference that unity and togetherness. And one of the things we talked about was creating a space for the Shinash to rest, so the divine presence. And this is not like a replication of the Mishkan, but it's a loosely abstracted idea of having a space for something to rest. And whether that's a community is a vessel to hold our culture, our ideas, our passions, our histories, but the individual and the self can also be a vessel, like where you hold your soul and where you allow that presence to come and rest within you. So the divine presence Yiscah spoke about will only reveal itself when we are united. And I tried to connect this concept to the idea of the tzedek box. So we invite the Mishkan in through acts of kindness and holiness, and through acts of righteousness, justice, and care for our community, we're able to achieve unity. So by coming together and uniting through our differences, the unity we can create as a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So, yeah. And one of the title of this piece is in He Assembled. Yiscah spoke about how everybody came together and assembled these parts, and there were very specific instructions. And as you can see, there's disparate kind of ideas in the mediums that I used. So there's the wooden pieces, the gold pieces, and the plastics. And if those were separate, they wouldn't have the same impact. But I wanted it to feel like something that was assembled, but with an intentionality.
You know, Mara, what I just heard, I really appreciate how you took the phrase assembled, because initially in the beginning, it's Moshe assembled us. And then what brought us together was us assembling the Mishkan. It was beautiful. Wow, that was really exquisite, that connection of assembling.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed learning with you, and I hope that this art does justice to the teachings that that I got to hear privately, and I'm so excited for everybody else here in this talk to get to hear it as well.
I want that Mishkan in my home. Beautiful. It's beautiful. What also struck me is that the name of the artist who was appointed to be the, I guess, the artist in residency, to use a modern term, his name is Bezalel, and in Hebrew it means to be in the shadow of God. And I'm very struck when I look at your piece. My eyes at first go right to the centerpiece, to the actual tzedek box, this box that is receiving all the kind deeds and righteousness in the world. And then as I drift away from it, my eyes naturally really focus on the shadow. Like the shadow is part of the object. It's not separate from the object. So Bezalel, who was the lead artist, engineer, architect, as Moshe commanded to him how this Mishkan was to be built, he was always in the shadow. The focal point was the Shekhinah, was the divine presence. But without Bezalel, this project would have never happened, would have never occurred, would have never been brought to completion. So here I see the shadow is just as important as the actual object of which it's shadowing.
I love the angle in which this is, that it's almost looking up from above, and that gaze of seeing the Mishkan from a height above it. Whose perspective are we invited to be observing the Mishkan from?
That's a great question, because you have to consider the audience when you're creating work. I would say from your individual perspective, because this is something that invites all to kind of partake in it for this specific piece, because it's about unifying. So I'm not creating it necessarily for a prescribed point of view for this one. And then when this is viewed in person, one of the features of it was a little bit harder to translate into a photograph, but I can illuminate this from below. So the light kind of expands outward, and which I guess you could reference like the way that the light of Shabbat kind of flows out into the rest of the week, and it bleeds into our existence and kind of helps us stay unified within our own cycle.
And Yiscah, I'm curious what you see in this, with kind of thinking about those concentric circles, and what those circles of the camp and the Mishkan, and what kind of biblical ideas come out of those ideas of having these inner circles and outer circles, especially with your concept of Achdut.
Yeah, I think we learned from Rav Kook that Achdut does not mean sameness. It means oneness. It's like a symphony orchestra. You know, you have your different types of instruments, your wind instruments, your string instruments, percussion, all the different instruments, and they don't sound like each other. So I'm looking at the different circles. I'm looking at the different pegs, if I can use the right words, if that's the right word, to describe these black pieces that are connecting one to the other. And I see there are unique personalities or shapes to each one, and yet they've come together. Going back to the symphony, it's like, as long as each instrument is tuned, they're literally all on the same page, on the same score of the music, with one conductor. Here the conductor is God. Here the conductor is the Holy One. Blessed be he, she, it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Shekhinah. And each of these pieces represents a different instrument. But when we look at it, we see the whole. And there's even a midrash that says that when one would look at the Mishkan, one would never know that many people, or hundreds of people, were engaged in the building of the Mishkan. It looked like one seamless effort by one person. And yet we know that was not true. So here I see one piece, and then when I really study it, I see the different, it's so nuanced with the different shapes of these circles and how they're connected. So they become me'uchad because each one is maintaining its own integrity to its shape and its position, moving up, coming to the middle, and then moving, and then, yeah. So that's part of what I'm seeing. That's part of what I'm seeing there, is the not the sameness, but dafka, because there's a unique character to each piece, it comes together as one, which is marvelous. It's so inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm seeing just a quick little question in the chat, which I can address briefly. Why did I use different sized rings? That was partially because of, it was a structural decision, so the piece could support its own weight. Like I had to try out a couple different approaches to get this to stand on its own. I'm traditionally like a painter, so this was kind of a new exploration for me, and I wanted to kind of challenge myself in this mode of creation with another person, like working in tandem. And also I feel like it gives it like a volumetric, it's able to occupy space a little bit more elegantly and give it almost like a feeling of weightlessness. So the thin, transparent rings, like expanding outward, it gives it an idea that it's like continuing away from itself, but then like the structural parts of it with those like wooden slots, those give it like almost like an architectural feeling at the same time. So it's trying to contrast between rigid and something a little bit more fluid, because with the actual like structure of this piece.
It's so interesting how your language goes between the architecture of this and then also the vessel and the object. And I feel like you're flowing between language of whether this sits as a vessel that's a kli that's used inside of the Mishkan, or this is a model, a depiction of the Mishkan itself. And if there is a difference between kind of the microcosms of those individual objects, those ritual objects, and the wider goal of the entire structure.
I view this as like more of an abstract representation, but I did want it to be like semi-functional as like a tzedek box if it was to be used as one, although it doesn't have to be. But like one of the reasons why I left it kind of empty on the inside with that opening is that you could place those writings about acts of righteousness and things that you hope to change for your community through your own actions in there. So it's a way to kind of almost like manifest that as a way to, I guess, project a hope for unity in the future. So that's like one of the, I guess, dual purposes of it. Because I personally don't have, I wasn't struck with the divine, inspiration to build the Mishkan in the same way. And I felt like it might have been like sacrilegious to go about and do so. So I wanted to interpret kind of the unique moment that I had with Yiscah and create something that was a little bit more of an artful interpretation.
What I'm seeing with the open space, and I believe the open space speaks as it speaks, its message is not less important, it's at least as important. And it reminds me of when Moshe first met the divine, when he had this encounter at the burning bush. Once he finally surrendered to the command that he was actually going to go into Egypt and be the redeemer, he asked God a very obvious question, like, by what name do I refer to you? Like, my name is Moshe, who are you, right? And the initial answer that God gave to him is the space inside of what you've created. Hey, yeah, I shall be, you can say, I shall be. Well, we don't know what that is because that's the future. And I really appreciate and value and honor how you don't have that space defined, because none of us know when we encounter the divine presence until we actually encounter her, what that experience will be like. All we know is it shall be what it shall be. And we won't know it till we're experiencing it. So in a way, the emptiness is at least as important as the actual physical objects. I think it's an intrinsic part of the piece.
Thank you. And I think that when there is something that's left open, it's an invitation in a way. It's an invitation for something to exist in this space. And another thing I was thinking of when I was making this was I've heard like the letters of the Torah, like I've heard some people refer to it as like the white space surrounding the actual text is just as, if not more important than what's already written there, because it's the things that we can't understand, like the black fire on white fire idea. So it's kind of, that was like wiggling around a little bit in the back of my mind when I was constructing this, because you need absence to emphasize presence, because without one or the other, we'd just be you'd be looking at like a continual blob. So I think that that's visually very important and then conceptually important, because you need contrast in life.
That's really remarkable that you just said that, because the Zohar teaches us that the space in between the letters is the unknown. And all we know through the verses is what we're told. We don't know what we're not told. And this is why this really answers a question many of us have in terms of the halakha, the Jewish law that governs the kashrut, the appropriateness of a Sefer Torah to be read with the blessing in the Beit HaKnesset, that if it's found that two letters are touching each other, the whole entire Sefer Torah, it becomes invalid. And we can ask the logical question, whatever the two letters are that may be by accident connected, we still know what the word is. So why would it be invalid? It's because it no longer has that space. And there's as much of a message in the space, in the unknown, as there is in the known. And that's the relationship between the black and the white in the Sefer Torah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that piece. That's beautiful. That's so inspiring.
Mar, Rabbi Yissaschar Katz wants to know about, to elaborate on the idea of the box itself. Why a box, and why are we collecting the tzedek acts?
It felt like, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about ritual objects recently and acts of community care. Like separately from this, I've been meeting with a group of other artists for the Shemitah year. And it's just something, I guess that's a little bit of my personal life, like bleeding into this project, because nothing like exists truly in a vacuum and you're informed by your experience. And we've been personally like talking about like ways that we can care for the community, as well as we're thinking about the earth and resetting and rest, but also care. So I think I wanted to have, in a way, like in a way to inspire action. And I think that kind of bled into this, and it felt relevant to what we were saying. We just spoke a lot about how it was the community kind of coming together. So I felt like that was a little link. So
it's beautiful, the idea of the community come together in the project itself having value. And Mordechai Edel is curious about emphasizing the functionality, where a lot of tzedakah boxes contain, but this is holy. This is holy and holy, where it feels like in having all of this open space, that functionality of containing things kind of spread out. And what are your thoughts on the functionality of the open space?
I think that I like the idea of something that can be expanding into, I guess, your life, your space, what you're looking at, what you're seeing. You're, I think, more actively aware of something when it's in your line of sight, and by keeping it contained, in a way, it's separate from you. So this is a way that it can bleed outward.
And yeah, we have Yana saying the distinction between a tzedek box and a tzedakah box, where tzedakah is like with wealth and with resources, you're trying to contain and like hold it all, aggregate it all in one place. But acts, tzedek, is you don't want to contain it. If all of the righteousness is held in one place, then you're not doing a good job. You should be inspired by containing it in one place and then spreading out. Yiscah, I'm also curious about your thoughts on this idea of combining the ancient and kind of like laced in the gold and the modernity of the laser cut, and how those two, how that plays into our mission of building a Mishkan. What is a Mishkan that's modern look like, and how kind of what's your sense of where those worlds of the ancient and the modern come together?
I'm reminded of a teaching from Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. He says, may his memory be for a blessing. He said that when it comes to time, at any given time, we are like a dot. Like if you think of like this is time, and it's made up of like it's a thread running through generation after generation after generation. So at any given time, our time now, we become what's called guardians of the past. So we honor, we hold space, we even teach our history. And at the same time, we need to look ahead and become trustees for our children's future. So what is being asked of us is not to repeat the past. It's to honor the past, and in light of the past, whatever it is we've learned from it, for our generation to rebuild our Mishkan. Reb Simcha Bunim also, who was a very radical, I mean, he really has some amazingly, what I would consider to be redemptive, moving from surviving to thriving. He passed away in the early 19th century in Przyszyska in Poland. He even believes that we're called upon in each generation to add something new, so we can then be part of the reason that the generations after us can look back and be inspired to do what they need to do. So by repeating exactly what the generation before us does, he actually uses a very harsh metaphor. He believes it's a form of spiritual idol worship, because it's denying oneself the God-given gift of being created in the image of the Creator. And just as the Creator is always creating, it's not just a one-time creation. Every time we inhale and we receive breath, we are being recreated. Everything in the world is always being created. For us to really honor that zechut, that privilege of being created in the Creator, we need to create. So how I make my Mishkan, how I attempt, how I go about, how I dedicate, is through my spiritual practice, my being open-hearted to learn from all kinds of people, to learn how to be, to learn not how to be, as it says in Pirkei Avot, Ezehu chacham misha lomed mekol chavero. Sometimes it's just as important to learn what not to do from other people. And then I put it all in the blender and I give myself permission to be creative, to suggest to myself how I can make me a home, a mishkan, a bayit for the divine presence. It doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that I don't take it apart and redo it. I don't know, Mar, if you just did this one, and I'm not expecting you to share with all of us. I can't imagine that any artist just puts it together and there we have it. You know, you build it, you take it down, you paint, you paint over. We're a work in progress. And that's, I think, the active phrase. We are in progress. It's a work in progress. Avodat halev, which is spiritual work, it's spiritual practice. There's a dynamic to it. There's a movement, there's a fluidity to it. So I think that's the best way I could respond to your question, is not to get stuck, not to be cemented into haya, hoveh, v'yeh. Only God can say, God was, God is, God will always be. So there was a little interference with that noise, but yeah, so I think that's at this, for this, in this way, I have responded to your question, I hope.
Yeah, and I love how the old is kind of in this patchwork where it's forming itself. We're returning to what was. There's like this shav of Shabbat, but then there's also creating space for new. I really love, Mar, how we're kind of looking through rose-tinted glasses. That there's this pink haze kind of above this picture, and what inspired you to kind of have that color composition to add to just the beauty of this object itself?
So I think that having just a slight tint of a color, it gives it a little bit of context, so it's not just floating in this like white wall, like almost white cube gallery aesthetic. I thought that it gave it more of like a almost like earthy, not earthy, it's still kind of a cool tone red, but it gives it more of a warmth in feeling, so it's not just this harsh thing on a white background. So that was an aesthetic choice to kind of ground it in a way, but then there's still, it's like doesn't interfere at the same time, so the emphasis remains on the piece.
Well, if I may respond to that, I think there's also a spiritual aesthetics to how we build our own Mishkan, rather than it be a black and white. Again, moving away from the harshness, moving into softness. The PSS Rebbe, Rabbi Kalanimus Kalma Shapira, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, he talks about in many of his books, especially in B'nai Machshava Tova, Cultivating Spiritual Higher Consciousness, the need to cultivate softness and gentleness. As one of my teachers, one of my early Jewish meditation teachers taught us, Rav James from Or Halev, instead of trying hard with the hard things in life, try softly with the hard things in life. So I look at that color, and it that color lends a softness, a gentleness. And I would like to suggest that let that inspire us for how we build our own inner Mishkan with gentleness and with softness and with care and with compassion and kindness, rather than forcefully and with a coarseness or an abruptness. That's part of what I see in that beautiful, gentle color.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Yiscah.
I think there's also that point comes together with a very important theme of where the center of this piece about and he assembled, thinking about assembling together from a place of softness. I'm curious for both of you, the challenges of assembly, the challenges of bringing lots of people together and working on something united. What are the dangers of that? What gets left behind? What gets lost? And kind of how do you see that, like, those ideas are kind of addressed in this piece where assembly comes at a cost?
I have to think about that for a second. Yiscah, do you want to hop in?
I'll hop in. I would like to gently push back on the question a little. I'm not so sure about what could be lost. I would say, though, what is at risk? What are we risking when we build? Well, we could build the Tower of Babel. We could risk humility. We could risk gratitude. We can risk being aware that most of what's going on in our lives and around us, we have no control over. And the area that we do have control, for many of us, that proves to be quite a challenge. So when we come together to build whatever it is we're building, something physical, or to build a community, or to build, to really follow through with an idea that we may have, we need to be careful that our ego, that the sense of anochiyut, that sense of I-ness, because if there's I-ness in this Mishkan, there's no Mishkan. Then it's one solid block of just substance. And I believe that's what is at risk. We need to be careful. We need to be really careful. And we need to cultivate humility. Dafka, especially when we're more successful. So as we put together whatever we call our Mishkan or our project, or the bringing from potential to actuality, an idea, it could be in business, it could be in whatever, in art, in education, whatever it is, we need to be careful that when we are succeeding, what could be at risk, and that is humility and gratitude. And wonder, as Heschel says, to live in a state of radical amazement. I mean, I look at this and I'm radically amazed. Can I look at my own work, my own practice each day and be radically amazed? That's what could be lost. That's what I believe is at risk.
Wow. Mär, do you have any thoughts on this?
I guess coming from a different working definition of what could be at risk, because that when people are coming together and working for a greater goal, I guess what comes up, just like the sacrifice becomes the self. And I think that's a very positive thing to lose, but it's a little bit scary to almost let go of ego and what you want and your personal intention. You can't have too many chiefs, like too many chefs in the kitchen. You need to kind of follow a greater plan. And I think you have to kind of let go in a way of, that struggle for dominance in a sense. And I think that that's a very positive thing to lose when embarking on a greater mission, because many things that have been achieved in this, in general, it takes sometimes letting go of what one person's agenda is to work together for something that's for the greater good. But That's with a different, I guess, understanding of what risk could be. But I think that both are correct.
And earlier, Yiscah, you'd pointed us to the shadow, and Rabbi Kahana asks about the shadow of what came in the wake, that came preceding the Mishkan, is the shadow of the sin of the golden calf, and Aaron's role in his centrality in the Mishkan versus his centrality in allowing for that sin to take place. And in your teaching, you talk about that relationship. So would you mind opening up that conversation about the hafrada from the sin of the golden calf, and how is the repairal found in the Mishkan?
We miscalculated the 40th day. And I would like to believe that if I were there, I would somehow recalculate, so I would take the high road. I don't know what I would do, though. Here, we were like 7 weeks plus 40 days out of Yetziat Mitzrayim after 210 years of being enslaved, and all of a sudden we really believed that our leader perished, and here we are in the wilderness. My gosh, can you imagine how traumatized we must have been? And here Aharon, I believe, he tried to buy some time. He never wanted to build a golden calf. I'm not convinced that's what he wanted to do, even according to the Peshat, but definitely according to the deeper teachings. He really was hoping that at any second Moshe would like reappear. And he didn't castigate, he didn't, I really appreciate how there wasn't judgment against the people for being afraid, for wanting to have a leader. I don't believe they wanted to have another God, they wanted to have a leader. But what happened was there was more hafradot than there was achdut. People were, this is what happens when we're traumatized. This is what happens when we allow fear to define us. We begin to separate and pull apart. So 80 days later, we're being brought together. Aharon has a very big mission because he's the Cohen. He is our priest. And it really, we see it on Rosh Chodesh Nisan several months later when the Mishkan was completed, and he offered his offering. And that was the offering of an Edel, of a calf, a sin offering, first for him.
Wow.
He wanted to bring back the achdut. He wanted to bring back the trust and not to allow fear. There's nothing wrong with fear. I mean, that's part of life. That's part of living. There are things that frighten us. There are things that really scare us because of the unknown future. But the practice, when there's bitachon, when there's trust, and that's what fell apart on that fateful day, the 17th of Tammuz, when we built the Egel Zahav, was no one knows what will be tomorrow. Nobody. And there is a little bit, a twinge, there could be a fear in that. It's not to let that define us, not to let that govern our behavior. So I believe he wanted, through the Mishkan, he really was hoping, because everyone did come together again, that when he made this offering, the Shekhinah would then come back down, because she, so to speak, lifted up. She left us when we committed the sin of the golden calf. And it took all these months of building the Mishkan till Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 2 weeks shy of our 1-year anniversary out of Mitzrayim, for her to come back, And that's what he was dedicated to. He spent the rest of his life bringing peace. It even says in the Midrash that we would think that the Kohen Gadol, the great priest, would spend his days and nights in the Mishkan, attending to the spiritual needs, because he had such a high status and high responsibility, a great responsibility. And yet, in between what he was doing, he would always go out into the world, into the chaver. He'd go from tribe to tribe to try to see if there were arguments, if there were people were separating, and he would address it right then and bring them together. That was his. That was part of his kahuna, part of his priesthood. I think he was perhaps doing teshuvah the rest of his life for having been part of the separation without meaning to. And he excelled, he really excelled with compassion and with a lot of love and care in bringing people together.
So
Wow.
would we not have, oh, I'm sorry, no?
No.
So do you think that the creation of the Mishkan would not have happened if it was not kind of for the royal F-up with the golden calf?
Oh, there's many commentaries that have that position, that if there were no, well, look, we don't know what would have happened because it didn't happen, but we can imagine that if we waited patiently and we waited for Moshe to return, we would have been brought into Eretz Yisrael, and there would not have been even a need for a Mishkan. That is a way of thinking. Other people have suggested that the Mishkan has other purposes, other than just to be mechaper, to atone for the disunity or for the spiritual adultery of the golden calf, that there are other meanings to having a dwelling place, a physical dwelling place that we could focus our attention on, as this became the Beit HaMikdash. After when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beit HaMikdash, proportionally was the same measurements as the Mishkan, even though it was much larger and it was supposed to be permanent, not portable. So there is a part of life where we do need something physical to focus a lot of our rituals around, our attention. However, the deeper meaning of the Mishkan is really to build a bayit within, a dirah, a dwelling, a home for the, and I'm not convinced that would not be the case if there were no Egel Zahav. It just may be manifested differently.
And the sentence of the passage is V'shachanti b'tocham, that the Mishkan, the word of Mishkan, to indwell, is b'tocham, is inside of every individual. And I'm curious, Mar, from your own, it's so innovative and so beautiful to take that creation and to use that creation in a way of making it personal and different. What inspired you to kind of bring that out from within yourself and say, I'm not going to create a figurative representation of the Mishkan that I can pull out of like an art scroll, but to like go into that innovative space within yourself?
I wanted to kind of sidestep like the kind of the trap, I think, of building a literal Mishkan, because I felt like that would be a little too surface. And since this is a very unique way of going about creating, I really wanted to challenge myself to try something a little bit outside of my comfort zone. That's kind of what steered me more towards this. And I don't necessarily love, just personally, like literal illustrations of things. And I felt like I could try and think new thoughts with a new medium, if that makes sense. I have my little tricks and my little, shortcuts and my secret sauce for the paintings that I typically work on for my main body of work. And I wanted this to be a completely new experience for us, coming to it kind of like tabula rasa. Like I wanted it to be full blank slate, like ready to go and kind of listen to what was being taught to me and go with my gut instincts on that. So, and I think a successful project, you need to give yourself some parameters to kind of break all the rules from within inside those parameters. And I feel like by dictating the medium I wanted to use with this like a acrylic plexiglass situation, and knowing that I wanted to go in using, doing something more structural and implementing technology, this was this made sense. And I felt like because of that, instead of trying to shoehorn an idea into a painting, my work typically looks like these large kind of sculptural paintings. They're cut out on wood with a jigsaw, and there's intentionality behind that pertains to something different. So I was able to really listen to what the medium was telling me and follow it that way. And it felt more natural.
I'm curious also, Mar, about why you chose the number of spheres. Why not keep going and keep building beyond that? What prompted you to say it's enough? I've created the piece.
Sometimes understated is more powerful. And then also that's like my classy answer, but what you're not seeing when you're looking at this piece is the other failed attempts behind it. I had tried a couple variations. One was a bit larger with, I think, 80 pieces, and that had some structural issues, and it didn't look as graceful and as elegant. I wanted it to have this kind of feeling of openness, and it felt right when I was looking at it. It was like Goldilocks. This is too big, this is too small, this is just right. And I feel like it said what I wanted it to say on its own. And it's a quiet piece in a lot of ways. And by keeping it simple and understated, it gives it that quietness. And then it also helps kind of emphasize like the beautiful things happening with light and shadow.
Wow.
How many rings are there? Five?
Let me make this bigger. 1, 2. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of them.
Six. Well, six actually, I was hoping you would say 6. I just wasn't clear because we were building the Mishkan 6 days during every week. And on the 7th, we did not. We did not build on the 7th day on Shabbat. So here you see, it's almost like each level is a different day of the week in building the Mishkan. And then on the 7th, we just gaze.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Who would have thought? Wow.
Wow. This has been such an incredible journey, and both of you have shared I hope everyone who is here today got to get just a taste of the Torah and the art. In addressing one another, sometimes I write artists, Torah scholars, or Torah scholar artists, and sometimes it's hard to tell who, because both of you just share in such reciprocity with one another, that openness to want to grow and learn from, and it's been fabulous to just be a witness to all that you both have accomplished and created. And at the end of it, you are both creators, and you are both stepping in line with B'Tzalel in the shadow of the Mishkan, in the shadow of creation. Both of you have created something of beautiful reciprocity. And the Mishkan is a home of interacting with God in a way of reciprocity, where we're giving to God in a way that gives to ourselves. And we feed ourselves in a way that Hashem says is a reach nichoach. And I've been so inspired by both of you. If those who want to read the sermon that came out of this, Yiscah Smith wrote a really powerful, beautiful sermon. You can find it on the Amen Institute's website. The art, the majestic creation, we only see that final image, but just like the Mishkan itself, with it's a continual iterative process. It was so incredible that you took yourself out of your comfort zone, Mar, and going out of our comfort and allowing ourselves to be individuals that see tzedek out in the world is a beautiful manifestation that can kind of come out of this art, the art that you created, and out of your own creations. Our deeds and our actions are our creations. This has been so lovely, so beautiful. And it's also just wonderful to see everyone here today and to share in the accomplishment of what both of you have created. I wish everyone a beautiful afternoon. We're Wednesday, so we can start saying a good Shabbos. Have a beautiful Vayakhel as we continually assemble ourselves in front of each other. Take care.